Hello. How's everyone doing today? That was not believable. Sounded like 3 people out there. All right, so we're going to talk about revolutionizing insurance with AI. I am joined by Edward, Austin, and Garrett, though they're not in that order. But their mugs are up over there. All right, so we'll do the usual to kick off here. You guys want to jump in with some introductions? We'll just run down the line.
Is this working?
No?
Is it working now? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Edward Ruiz. I am AVP, we call it, there's different titles, but essentially I run the systems and data analysis team at Bright House Financial. So what that means is I'm in charge of the ingestion of data within our ecosystem and ultimately creating that data into an asset. We've done a lot of research in the space as it relates to AI and ChatGPT, so excited to be here with some good other experts in their space. And I do want to give a shout out to Kevin's shoes. I think he wins the shoe game. Great job.
Thank you, sir.
I like how you looked right past me when you said experts, which you're dead on. Hi, everyone. My name's Garrett Droege. I'm Director of Innovation for a retail insurance broker called IMA Financial. Locally, we're known as ECM Solutions here in the Charlotte marketplace. We're about a $10 billion premium into the marketplace firm, and I kind of do all things strategic level. I'm less in the trenches, so this will be interesting for me to be on this panel, maybe comic relief, hopefully. Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Austin Cook. I'm a self-identified data and technology nerd, by choice, I guess. My background's in consulting, data science, and solution engineering, and my current role is Director of Solution Engineering at Dataiku. Dataiku is a multi-persona end-to-end analytics platform that's aimed to achieve what we call everyday AI. So I hope that I can add some value on this panel, otherwise they might come get me.
I've had a chance to run into Dataiku a few times. You guys, they got good tech if you haven't checked them out and you're looking to help streamline your AI processes. All right, so we got introductions done. One thing that I think everyone struggles a little bit with is, what does AI really mean in the context of business? ChatGPT was in the title, it's not up there anymore. We will spend some time talking about that because I think they've done a remarkable job, OpenAI, of bringing AI to the forefront for everyday consumers. But ChatGPT is not easy to bring into enterprises, as most of my customers and other enterprises are finding out. So let's take a second. If you could just, what does AI mean to you inside of your business today? And just a couple applications outside of maybe the LLM chat space, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, it's a great question. The way that I see AI, and this is my definition of it, is it's supposed to help humans gather insight. How you do it, when you do it, that's to each use case. But when we look at it from the insurance industry, it's not a novel term. It's existed in some fashion or form. We've had to use it in models in data science or even in models when we're assessing risk. That's how I see it internally. When I think of AI externally, I like to use the metaphor, I used this with my wife this morning. It's like, when I think of AI, I think of the droids in Star Wars. They're there to help you with your everyday activity. So I would say that would be the definition, is AI is a technology that is out there to help gain insights and help individuals with their productivity and ultimately gain insights.
Hopefully we're a little ways away from Skynet and cognitive AI.
Very much.
But, well, Garrett, what do you talk about your side?
Yeah, I mean, we've been using AI for 3 to 5 years, I guess, and as the artificial intelligence and machine learning component, the whole generative AI, ChatGPT is still relatively new to us. But that's exactly how we describe it. It's just smart computers that help you do what you do better and hopefully more efficiently. And yeah, nothing to add, really.
Austin, a little different to you, and I'm going to let you plug Dataiku a bit, but talk about how a platform can help get someone started on the AI, and what are some of a couple of the common use cases that you're seeing, and then I want to pull it back over to you two to talk about, give me one really, what the coolest thing you think you're doing right now that you can talk about, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'll try to not make this a marketing campaign, but just kind of touching on what Edward said. I love what he said, and obviously when your tagline is everyday AI, you get that question a lot. Well, what does AI mean? And so I'm sort of plugged into the typical mindset. I started in the statistical modeling days and moved your way throughout machine learning and AI, deep learning, all that stuff. I really just boil it down to using data to drive decisions. And so we talk about using data to drive decisions. I think that spans two spectrums: the mundane, which is really just wrangling some data, pulling it together, and generating a report that someone reacts off of. And then the moonshot, which a lot of the LLMs and those conversations are starting to get dove into, computer vision, satellite recognition, and stuff like that. And so it's I think one of the core challenges with that is just it's not necessarily always a tech problem, but it's also a people problem. And getting away from just algorithms and technology and Kubernetes and all that stuff, and abstracting that away and allowing people who have the domain expertise to really come into the fold and start generating more insights that they may be too intimidated to do prior experiences.
Great.
So to name the coolest thing that we're doing with AI, I would say the research. The insurance industry is, I think, let me just take a step back. When you think about the eras that we've experienced in the past 20 years, everyone's saying every company is a data company. I'm sure everyone's heard that. You can raise your hand with me. I've heard it a million times from a lot of folks. We're hitting this apex where we're trying to now pivot to now saying, hey, now every company's got to be an AI company. Well, that's great and all, but what my perspective of what's the coolest thing that we're doing with it is just learning more about it. But 5 hours ago, Brussels just passed legislation that's going to go to the European Council lawmakers to decide on additional legislation for AI. Colorado very recently just set out legislation that is trying to get in front of this AI movement. So for my team, for the folks that work with me, I think the most exciting thing right now is learning more about it and preparing ourselves. Some say that the apex is here in terms of moving towards AI. I see it as a preparation. We need to be ready for it and be educated so that when we do and are ready to mount that mountain, it is a matter of can we do it? I think that's the most exciting thing. We're in the midst of it.
All right.
I'll give you two. One's the most exciting to me. So I started a project called Web3 Labs at IMA, all things blockchain, Web3, metaverse, stuff that I'm into. And we're utilizing AI in blockchain applications. We're using it in augmented reality. We've got a big announcement coming out very soon about that. But if you ask my team, and at the desk level, I don't know the audience, so I don't know if it's carrier or broker or somewhere in between. But for a broker, we spend so much of our time doing data entry, copying and pasting information from one PDF to another, or inputting that into a rating engine. So what we built a platform last year that allows carrier proposals to come into a folder, and the folder recognizes new entrants, and it knows how to take that data, structure it, and put it into a proposal format that we can then send to our clients without anybody lifting a finger. And that's what everyone would say, well, that's the coolest thing ever, because that used to take me 2 hours. Now it's done in seconds. So
You just made a shockingly difficult process sound very easy, just for everyone in the audience. There's a lot of tech under there, from the OCR to the key feature extraction to the text generation that you've put together under there to shipping the proposals out.
Yes, but if you talk about the process, you talk about the technology, you lose everybody in the room. They're like, that's terrifying. I don't know what any of those acronyms are. I got to leave the conversation. Just say this is AI, and it's gonna save your life.
But all right, so I promised you guys I would challenge some things, so here we go. But is that the healthiest thing for the business these days, to obfuscate some of the process and the difficulty? Or do you see that the business is starting to have to come across that line more to understand the technology, to even understand what's feasible these days? And I'll give you an example. I was at one of my best friend's weddings last weekend, and at the end of the night, his uncle, who's a veterinarian, cornered me and wanted to build an AR application that themselves and the client could wear and dive in to be able to pull the dog's knee out and show them where they need to operate, like Tom Cruise Minority Report style. And I just kind of stared at him in just disbelief of like, well, yes, if you have, Mark Zuckerberg money, you might be able to do that, right? But like, so there's not an understanding of where the technology starts and stops. So how do you bridge that gap of what's possible versus not possible, but also to keep the business on the innovation side?
So I'll sort of jump in, and I completely agree, and I think that's what a lot of organizations are struggling with, is they see the fancy AI, and oftentimes, not pointing fingers at anybody, but IT jumps in and sees a technology and they're looking for problems, and oftentimes those fall flat, because at the end of the day the business is the ones that's typically making decisions or needs to adopt the technology. And so that's where a lot of the sort of understanding the end game and your end users comes into play. So if I'm going to provide a model or some recommendation, I need to explain it to you, and it needs to make sense, right? So that's where things like guardrails come in. That's where things like bias detection and responsible AI come into play, to make sure that your end consumers are actually okay with things getting pushed out to the masses.
I'd like to respond.
Please.
So it's a very interesting question, because when I look at technology, it's a tool, right? Do we need to obfuscate the fact that a tool is doing X, Y, Z? I don't think so. I think what we need to be more worried about is what is supplementing that tool, that technology, and is there transparency in how we're using that data? Is it, which again, talking a little bit about regulation, is there bias in that data? Is there some sort of discrimination that's happening through that data? Because the tool itself is not the problem. It's what data are you using to feed that tool. So I would say, if we are looking at trying to hide the technology from an IT perspective, I would say we're not. I think what we're trying to do is enable people to understand what data we're going to put through that tool, so that we can come with some sort of insight that allows us to say, yes, I can put my name behind those results. So obfuscating the tool is not, or the technology is not really the goal. It's more about understanding the data and not obfuscating that and misusing that for nefarious purposes.
Which comes back to every company is a data company.
Every company's a data company.
That's right. All right, so we've talked a little bit about what you're doing on that side, some of the opportunities. What about the future opportunities? What are you working on today that you think will add the most value to your customer? And if you could deploy AI to solve a problem specifically in your industry, like moonshot, where you at?
Sure. I mean, another problem, this is for carriers and brokers, is that our data sits in legacy silos that are not easy to navigate as a user. They're not easy to plug into modern architecture like an API. And every InsurTech company, if you're sitting in the room and you think, I'll just build an API and plug into the broker ecosystem, no, you won't, because our system is SQL Server based. It's 90s technology, if that, and you can't plug into it like you think you can. So for me, and I'll go back to my initial point with the desk level, like part of my job, a big part of my job, is selling new technology internally, and people are sick of new technology. They don't want a new login, a new password, something else to learn, sit through 6 weeks of onboarding to learn how to do this. They don't want that. They want a seamless interface that interacts with all the data silos that they need to work with on a daily basis. And for us, that's AI. That's a GPT-type chatbot that if you're a customer service representative, you could extract find me the policy for XYZ client, or I need to file a claim. What's the number for so-and-so's claims hotline? Like that kind of stuff, making it easy and efficient and in an interface that they can trust, but that they don't have to understand how it works. We need to understand how it works, but they keep it simple, stupid.
All right, so you started it with GPT LLMs, so we'll get to the ChatGPT portion of this discussion. Does everyone in here use ChatGPT? So all y'all are writing your emails with ChatGPT now? Got it. All right, good. One of the problems that you run into with ChatGPT is the phenomenon of hallucinations inside of LLMs, large language models, such as ChatGPT accusing the college professor of unwarranted sexual harassment. They tried to use it in a court case that came up with 3 legal precedents that never occurred. How do you, and Garrett, I know you just spoke last, but I do want to bring this back to you because you guys are using an LLM. How did you get there, and what did you do?
Well, we're using it. We haven't deployed it on an enterprise-wide basis because of that reason. Because we found those same hallucinations. We found it coming up with policy information that's incorrect or from a dated policy. So, I mean, part of the benefit of an LLM is that you have to build the model and constantly test and then supplement data on top of that to make sure that it's functioning. And we're not there yet. But I don't want anyone to think that we are.
I would just add, so one of the things that we've seen, and we've also experienced some of this hallucination, so I ask it, for example, one of my colleagues was working with some of the SE filings and stress testing results and asked it for the latest stress testing results, and it very sternly and inaccurately gave the wrong outcome. And so that's where things, I think, like prompt engineering and actually asking for citations of sources. But I think it overall just re-emphasizes what we've talked about previously, is that human-in-the-loop need. Certainly, if your human is just reading results and the LLM is very stern in its findings, without some sort of source or things like that, you might just take it for granted. But if you can re-architect the LLMs to identify its source, that's where some people are kind of helping that human in the loop to make sure that their things are accurate.
So I believe the term you're looking for there is confidently incorrect.
Yeah.
Edward, what are you guys doing from conversational AI, if anything at all? How are you looking at it? How are you approaching it?
It's a tough question to answer, mostly because I think when you look at Brighthouse and its history, we were spun off of a larger company. When we look at Brighthouse today, we are very much 6 years into our journey, and there's still a lot to learn. So that kind of goes back to my original position. The most exciting thing that we have at Brighthouse is the research and partnering with vendors and internal partners in identifying potential use cases, but more importantly, making sure that our data is positioned in a place where we can actually feed into these LLMs. Because like Garrett said, these LLMs, you can build them. You can build them with some sort of confidence, but the consistency, the transparency into the accuracy that it actually has, it just isn't there. If everyone's used ChatGPT and asked it a question, did you ever not get a response? No, because it's designed to respond. Now, what we're interested in as a company, but also from an insurance industry perspective, which is highly regulated, is how do we get insight around the percentage of accuracy that you have in those responses, right? Let me get a response back, but if I know it's incorrect, let's train the model to say, respond with something, but also give me a percentage to say, yeah, I'm 80% confident, I'm 90% confident, and provide the resources that back that up. To me, ChatGPT should be treated no different than us trying to write a paper for school or a thesis. You got to back it up, and you back it up with some sort of statistical percentage so you can measure the effectiveness. So I would say, from Brighthouse perspective, it's about that research and seeing where the technology is going to go so we can make better informed decisions.
That makes a ton of sense. And you hit on a really interesting point. 8, 9 years ago, somewhere in there, Google wrote a white paper on conversational AI. And one of the things they found is that if you have a knowledge graph and a bot that will respond back to customer service reps, as an example, I've gotten a fair amount of questions of how can you use that for business lead generation, sales generation, stuff like that. Is that if you responded back with 3 things that it could be, the bot's accuracy got into the 90s every % of the time. But as soon as you did 2 or 1, you started hitting the 80s and the 70% because it couldn't just get into there. And so you put the human element on that, which we spent a lot of time, that company I was at during that, telling people, don't think about AI as artificial intelligence. Don't think of it as cognitive. Think about it as augmented intelligence, which everyone who raised their hand using ChatGPT, you're using augmented intelligence to make my email sound smart. Clean up these 4 bullet points, turn them into 2 paragraphs for me, please. All right, so we talked about a lot of things on that front. Let's talk a little bit about the ethical considerations. And Austin, I'm going to kick this down to you a little bit. So there's a ton of things from model validation that you have to go through inside of enterprises to get models to go live. How are you seeing companies tackle things like fairness, things like bias, skewed results? How do you tackle that? And then I want to know what kind of processes you guys have in place then to enforce that.
Yeah, sure. So, it's kind of funny how it's evolved. So AI blows up, and then someone gets their hand slapped, and then all of a sudden the regulation and the responsibility comes in. And so now responsible AI, explainable AI, a lot of that has come through with a lot of our customers, and they're asking us, how do we tackle this? How do we go through this process? And so, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of things around, and anyone in regulated industries, there's always been sort of model validation processes, model risk management practices, and stuff like that. And so a lot of that already exists. But what you're seeing is it's sort of evolving as the technology evolves, and also how the applications of use evolve. So if you think about a simple prediction model, great, I can accurately predict someone is going to propensity to buy or churn for something, but is that perhaps biased? And so the development of the model is no longer the end result. It's really sort of explaining and proving that the model is doing what you said. And now you're seeing people go even further from the regulation side is not only that, but like at any point in time, someone can come in and ask me about some decision I made in the past, and I have to prove and show what decision I made and why. And so you hear things like reasoning codes, which as again sort of machine learning techniques to generate those reasoning codes. So when I make a decision, I can tell you why in a sort of simplistic manner. So it's really interesting how the regulatory aspect has evolved. I think the latest thinking from Next is around AI principles. So not necessarily people grasping and saying do this or do that, but like please abide by these principles, and we're going to hold you accountable. Importantly, intentional or not. So it's on you to know the compliance and the regulations, and pleading ignorance will no longer be allowed.
Okay, and Edward, you want to talk a little bit about some of the bias and ethics challenges you have?
Yeah, I would say when you look at the insurance industry in particular, especially in life, right, you have an underwriting process and you're using all these factors to try to come up with some sort of risk rating. Know that ChatGPT is a little bit biased. I'm going to so I think this thing's, is it dead? Oh, all right. We know that it's biased. We know that there's flaws in the system. So if people start using that in underwriting or start using that in other parts of a decision-making process, ultimately you've got to prove it out. I agree with what Austin was saying, and that's where I think regulation is trying to get ahead of it. Europe's main motivation was to try to ensure to get to create legislation that would get ahead of that bias. Colorado's doing the same thing. So there's a lot of ethical considerations, but one thing that I do advocate for any company is to look at this as an opportunity. Try to create some sort of environment that's controlled, similar to what you're doing in your space, right, Garrett? Where you've tested it out, you're proving it out, and you have a controlled environment where you can learn more from it. Because ultimately, it's inevitable. It's going to come. So what are you doing today to prepare for it? And I think doing what you're doing in your space, having it in a controlled environment, helps inform those ethics and biases that might exist that we maybe haven't even realized yet.
Unless you have something you want to add, I have something real fun for you.
Yeah, just a couple seconds. So we also insure a lot of AI companies, which is a really hard space to get commercial insurance for, and because insurance underwriters don't understand AI at all, and so anything they don't understand gets, six-figure insurance premium even as a pre-revenue startup. That's just how it works. But there's a product out there by Munich Re, which is a very large multinational reinsurer called AI Sure, that essentially does an assessment of the AI model and grades it and gives essentially a warranty that the AI company can then use talking to their clients to say, we have gone through this assessment and we are certified, and if there ever were a hallucination or something in the algorithm that produced an undesired result, you can file a claim against us for $5 million, $10 million, whatever. Pretty cool product, so just thought I'd mention it.
That is very cool. All right, Garrett, I've enjoyed picking on you with some of my more interesting questions that have come through. So you talked about the process automation that you put in place to streamline things, remove hours of work from an individual human, right? Robotic process automation, another form of AI, things that we see happening regularly. Let's go ahead and throw, self-driving cars, semi-trucks there's a lot of autonomous semi-trucks on the road right now. San Francisco, you can get in taxis that are completely automated. It's a very wild and surreal experience. From an ethical consideration, the US was built on rugged capitalism. How are you and the team thinking about, or if you are, the ethical considerations around job displacement as you create these models and as you roll out more process automation?
Yeah, it's a great question, because we all, especially like white collar jobs, can easily be replaced by AI. We think it's just going to enable people to do their job better. That's at least what we're telling people, and I fundamentally believe that's true. But no doubt, there's some jobs that aren't going to exist anymore, and so I think prompt engineering is going to be a skill that shows up on people's resumes. That not only can I do this lower level data processing job, I can engineer prompts for the AI systems, and therefore I can operate as a team of 3 to 5. So yeah, I think it will displace jobs. There's no question, including my own.
I'm not smart, so I'm the first to go.
I'd like to make a quick comment on that, because it's interesting when you think about job displacement, right? As a society, we've had to upskill to have jobs that are considered white collar, right? That's kind of the term. You have to go to college or some sort of technical degree or just have experience in a space so that you can get that higher paying job. When I think about the term job displacement, I try to use a slice of data across time. After the Industrial Revolution, 70% of jobs today didn't exist back then. Are we better for it? I would say yes. Our way of living, our way of being able to enjoy our lives, our way to enter a gig economy, if you want to, has allowed for that. So whenever I hear the word job displacement, it's always that connotation that, hey, we're just going to replace jobs. No, to me, it really means an opportunity for people to proactively look for those opportunities to upskill, because as the society, if we continue to upskill, our lives will just continue to get better. And I think that's the way we should probably be looking at it, is not are we going to displace jobs, but are we equipping those individuals who might have a job that's displaced the opportunity to upskill? Because as a society, I think we will benefit from that.
Or is Mike Judge a fortune teller, and idiocracy is well on its way? All right. Do you guys have anything else you want to add? Because we have gotten quite a few questions to run through. Ready to jump into that? All right, let's jump into it. Thank you, everyone who's provided questions. In what ways will AI allow the integration of new sources of personal data, such as health indicators, behavioral tendencies, actual behaviors? Question mark. How will it allow new integrations? So I think one of the great examples of this that people see is Verizon had a partnership with car companies, plug this into your car, get sensors of your acceleration, your top speeds, et cetera, right, to lower your car insurance. So telematics information there, right? What are you seeing on your side?
What I would say is something very briefly, and it's contextualization. When you look at different sources, right, it's how do you contextualize, at least when I look at a policy, is how do I contextualize that policy life cycle to that person's life? Because I think there was a speech by Lisa earlier where she was underwritten 25 years ago, but her life has changed, right? When you start thinking about contextualization of data and different sources, that's ultimately what you're trying to do, is supplement what you have with additional insights. So the way that I see it is there's hopefully going to be some method of us being able to deploy AI in different places and be able to gather insights, anonymized insights, so that we're not having to replicate that data or have to use it in nefarious ways or have it considered used nefariously if it's done in-house.
Do you see it becoming an opt-in? Like, I would like to opt in for you to have access to my health records. I remember taking a physical specifically to get lower life insurance, as an example, right? As an opt-in. Do you see that becoming more prominent?
Yeah, I think in the future, and this back to my comfort zone of Web3 blockchain, I think if you've heard of a thing called soul-bound tokens, so it's essentially like an NFT, cartoon monkey picture for your life that you can then authenticate to whatever source you need. So if you're filling out a life insurance application, you can share every bit of data that they need automatically. If you're applying for a new job, you can do that with all your educational credentials, continuing education credits, all your certifications, all that will be contained in this soul-bound token, and you'll have complete and total autonomy of that and be able to share it at will.
So you essentially provide the features that will generate your policy.
Correct.
I like that. All right, Austin, how can we leverage generative AI to derive predictive analytics / customer behavioral insights to aid in marketing and sales strategies?
Wow. Okay. So generative AI, I struggle to find, and this is sort of a common question that we're getting from a lot of our organizations is Gen AI, LLMs, ChatGPT are the new sort of buzzword, and people are excited about it. And what you oftentimes see is the term of using a hammer as a rock, or vice versa. So rock as a hammer. Ultimately making better predictions with LLMs isn't generally the types of use cases that you're going to see kind of out there. What you will see, though, I think, quite frankly, is on the back end of that. Once I have predictions, how do I actually action those? And so I know that you're going to, likely to buy this policy. Well, what messaging, what advertisements, and where is that going to sort of strike the right balance and ultimately get you to chime in? So I think on the action side of things, you'll see the LLMs more likely used. Perhaps on the development of models, so in your space, Kevin, with generating synthetic data, where maybe I have new products that I don't have data to train a prediction model, but it looks like this other product. So I might do some generative synthetic data type processing to develop my model.
Which I think what you're referring to on that tail end there is often overlooked side of generative AI, which is labeled data generation to be able to use inside of models for when you have a low set of data, also known as the cold start problem inside of model generation. Are any of you using AI in the underwriting process? If so, can you speak to how you've been using it?
I'm just going to go with a no.
We're not underwriters.
No's a perfectly fine answer. It's just a question.
But I think, I think underwriters could use it to better understand a risk, right? So they could, if they knew how to write prompts, then they could use it to better assess what is the risk profile for a certain company. I don't think their companies would like them making an underwriting decision off of that model. So maybe they can't. And for us, like, we want our people utilizing ChatGPT, playing around with it, coming up with great use cases, and maybe we'll spin up a project team around that. But we don't want people putting proprietary sensitive data, anything specific around a client, because all that's now public. And you saw, Samsung had a little oops moment with that. So we certainly don't want that.
Yeah, I think that comes back to, like, once you've trained the model, putting access patterns on what you can and can't access inside that model is, I don't want to use the word impossible, because with enough money, enough technology, anything's possible. But that's really what's underlooked and underappreciated for what OpenAI has done for ChatGPT, is those nanny rails they've put on place to keep it accessible to other people, so it's not ruined by prompt injection from a cybersecurity standpoint. We had a client a while ago, like, the big thing for them was they used to do all of their insurance writing for consumers inside of zip codes. And then being able to just get the data, be more granular, train larger models, they were able to go down to individual address levels. So if you lived on the top of a hill, the bottom of the hill may have to carry flood insurance, the top of the hill didn't. And that was a huge thing for them and their customers, and actually myself when I lived in Florida, which was quite nice. Austin, you want to talk about the cybersecurity threat that generative AI can create, or AI in general?
So briefly, of what I know, I'll say in relation to, like, generative AI and ChatGPT, probably what they're referring to is like prompt injections, where people are essentially injecting prompts into the models to sort of overtake them and either screw them up, as we've seen with what was Microsoft's issue that they had, or even just introduce some toxicity or some hallucinations that can impact the results. And so the challenge, as always, with any sort of model is the data that it's trained off of. And so if you ultimately mess with that data, you're ultimately messing with that model.
That tracks on that. We have a question about domain-specific LLMs reducing hallucinations. Anyone want to tackle that?
One thing I would say is that there's definitely white space in that. When you start thinking about industry-specific LLMs, it's if the insurance industry, which is a highly regulated industry, takes a position, then you can create a startup or some sort of company that would allow for you to tap into other insurers, other carriers, and be able to essentially aggregate that data and create some sort of model that everyone can use. Now, where are we in respect to that? I'd say we're pretty far away. But again, it kind of go back to my point about creating these controlled environments. If you can create a controlled environment with sufficient data, then I can see that being something more near term. But there's definitely, especially since this is a innovation conference, there's definitely an opportunity for some of these startups to start thinking about what does it look to create these LLMs in industry-specific areas.
Oh, good. Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think this conversation comes up quite a bit, and I think it ultimately comes down to economics as well. ChatGPT, some of these massive large language models can do just about everything, and they're general and broad by design. And so as you start to think about the tasks that you want to tackle, well, there's questions to be asked. For example, like, what's my risk tolerance? Is this something that I'm willing to just send outside of my walls or to an API? But also, what's the outcome? What's the ask of these models? So, for example, like summarizing text is a fairly, especially if you're summarizing like 20 pages of text, that's a lot of compute, and that takes a lot. Whereas something like sentiment analysis, is this positive, negative? Like, that doesn't need to be an LLM. We've been doing sentiment analysis for quite some time, and so why spend the capital to send it to an LLM? So I think these sort of economics are coming into play. The other thing around domain-specific LLMs is comes down to business strategy. And so again, if this is something that I think is a competitive advantage to me, by leveraging a public LLM, I'm essentially allowing all of my competitors to have the same results that I am. And so again, it kind of folds into economics from that regard.
And this is a great example of why data science is hard, because I could regale Austin for hours as to why sentiment analysis is an ungodly hard problem to solve in the modern technology digital age. All right, going back to the hallucinations, just to answer that question, because it's the domain specific, I think, is an interesting piece as well. There is a general argument in the data science community as to whether precision models or one model to rule them all existing inside of LLMs is the right direction. I think that is a largely unsolved question and very use case dependent. But if anyone wants to look more into LLM hallucination reduction, the current running theory behind that is model chaining, and essentially having the models check themselves to raise the confidence of that accuracy. So what you would want to go and look at is model chaining LLMs, hallucination reduction. That's your Google buzzword to go research if you really want to dive into that specific hell. All right, we are at time. Are we at time? Yeah, we are at time. First, I would like to thank you so much for coming up here, giving your time to be a part of this talk. Really has been great. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.